Well, let's begin with first lesson. We have a definite objective for this lesson, which is to get you started reading and singing Gregorian chant. To do that, we're going to have to learn how to read the notation. It's a little bit like reading a book. There was a time when we didn't need notation for Gregorian chant, that the memory was good enough so that the boy simply learned from an older fellow, the older fellow repeating a certain number of times. He learned by heart the Gregorian chant. But eventually, they came down with a few cheat notes, stenographic notes, to show you whether to go up or down. Since then, though, the notation has developed fully enough so that now it signifies exactly how much you go up and how much you go down. So we're going to have to look at that and learn to read that just like you read a book. And that's the way we're going to have to do it, because now it's a fact that Gregorian chant is in the books. This chapter is going to cover the staff, the clefs, the notes, the alteration of the T and the B flat and the Custos, leaving, as you can see on the next page, some rhythmic signs for next class. Basically, what we're going to be doing is getting you started, just the basics, so that you know how to read a few exercises, so you can do a few exercises at the end of this lesson. So let's begin with the staff. The staff is a kind of grid on which you place the notes, which is set so that you know exactly what note is being signified. You have 4 lines in Gregorian chant, and note the way that you read the 4 lines. You start, the first one is the bottom one, and 2, 3, 4 is the top one. There are 4 lines instead of 5 lines in modern music. Modern music uses 5 lines. That's because Gregorian chant needs less of a range than modern music generally. Now, in the spaces or on the lines, you can place the notes, which are we give you here the square note, which is the basic note of Gregorian chant. More about that later. You can place the notes then either below the first line, or on the first line, or here between the first and the second line, and so on all the way up, and on the top line, 4th line, and on or above the top line. What happens when you need more, when you go off the grid? Well, there's a possibility of adding a ledger line. The ledger line here is shown in the next diagram, allowing you to go one more step. This note above the 4th line. Here you have on the ledger line and a note above the ledger line. On the bottom, you have one ledger line below. Now that is the maximum. Gregorian chant doesn't allow, because it doesn't need any more than one ledger line below or above. Why is that? Well, because of the nature of the human voice. Gregorian chant is not a virtuoso kind of music. In opera, you might need two octaves range, maybe even more. With a flute, you might need 3 or 4 octaves. With Gregorian chant, you get maybe an octave and two notes, an octave and a third, an octave and a fourth. That's all. So there's no need really to have more than what you're given here. That is, one ledger line below, one above. The next diagram is just to prevent a mistaking the ledger line here from what we call an epizema. Notice the difference between the ledger line and the epizema. The ledger line goes through the notes. It's also longer. The epizema is short, and you find it above or below the note or the note it affects. We'll cover exactly what that means in on the next chapter. Now with that, we have the basic elements, but there's one thing missing, and that can be shown from this little diagram here. How do we know what, for example, that note is, or that note is? It could be any note. That could be do, re, mi, anything. What we need is a key. A key, the do key is shown here on the next page. The do key tells you where do is. Here it's on the fourth line. Notice the shape of the key. It's in the form of a C. And here we'll just open a little parentheses. The correspondence between the do, re, mi and the ABC of modern music. Here we have a little diagram to explain. See, A corresponds to La, B corresponds to T, C here corresponds to Do, D to Re, E corresponds to Mi, F corresponds to Fa, and G corresponds to Sol. Is there a complete equivalence? No. You see, with the letter system, normally that corresponds to a definite pitch. So, see, this is a tuning fork A440. That's A 440 cycles per second. That's a definite pitch. And that's what we call absolute pitch. With the movable do system, the do can be anywhere. You can take do, 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 doesn't matter. Let me illustrate with an example. I think that is the easiest way to understand. Suppose I were to take a melody, just make it up a melody, a very simple melody. Alleluia. That corresponds to do, re, mi, do. Now, I can take that do anywhere I want. Suppose that were too low. I wanted it high. I sing do, re, mi, do. I don't have to think. All I have to do is decide where I'm going to start and keep the same tune. Or even higher than that. Do, re, mi, do. Or suppose I need it lower. Do, do, re, mi, do. There's no difficulty in transposing for the human voice. And basically that's all you need. However, with instruments, because they're geared to absolute pitch, to change the starting note means to involve fingerings, sharps and flats, and as I'd like to show you here on the piano, the black and white keys. Now, if we were to play this on the piano, we have no difficulty with the first thing we play, But now the second one, we're going to have to use black keys. The first two notes are black keys. And then if we move up another half tone, the third one is a black key, the other two are white. If we move up another tone, the first one is a black key and the other two are white keys. Then the same thing holds for any instrument. Take a flute or a trumpet. You have different notes you have to transpose into different keys, and above that, you have to add the fingerings. So again, we see that the movable Do system, in as much as it's much simpler, fits the needs of Gregorian chant. So this movable Do system is most adapted to what we're doing in Gregorian chant. It simplifies things. We don't need sharps and flats, almost. You need one flat. There's one flat involved in Gregorian chant, and we'll talk about that just later. So we started off on that tangent, starting from the C clef, the Do clef that we were looking at in the manual. There is a Do clef, and the manual gives the alto clef in modern music, which derives from this, well, you can see a kind of a suggestion of the C here. There's a Fa clef also in Gregorian chant. You can see it suggested there by the stem added to the C. It makes kind of a Fa. And it's more stylized in the derived bass clef, Fa clef, in modern music. Remember that the two dots here, which make your kind of teeth of the Fa, surround the line that marks the Fa in the bass clef. In modern music, you also have a G clef, a treble clef. You can see the suggestion of the G, but that's not used in Gregorian chant. You'll see that the Do clefs and the Fa clefs are chosen simply in accordance with the need. Whatever makes the notation easier and easier to read, that determines whether the Do or the Fa clef is used. But if that's the case, we're going to have to be able to read in Do and clef and in Fa clef. More on that just in a second. Now we just want to get an idea of where the names of the Do, Re, Mi movable Do system came from. And that came from the hymn for the Feast of St. John the Baptist. Let me show you here. In the 11th century, all there was a stenographic kind of notation telling you go up now, you go down now. Guy de Rezzo, a monk, a Benedictine monk, came up with a system whereby the notes were named and put on the staff. And he took the hymn of St. John the Baptist, which you have here on page 4. And if you look here, the first note of each incise, which is in red, is circled along with the text that goes with it. Now here we have a Fa clef. And if we count down, Fa, Mi, Re, that's Do there. Do, Re, Mi at the beginning of this next incise, Fa at the beginning of the next incise, Sol, La, and S, J, Sancti Ioannes. S and J is the equivalent of SI, which gave for the Europeans C, but since Julie Andrews and the Sound of Music, that became tea I drink with jam and bread. So you've got ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, or ti, corresponding to the notes actually in the music. Now, before we listen to this hymn, this tune, let's just first of all give two explanations. First of all, why is ut not do? Well, ut was changed to do later on by some musicologists. they found that do was much more better for singing. It gave an initial consonant and an easier vowel. And then why is T or C not, why is the note T not in the melody? Well, that's just too hard. You have to come back to the do afterwards, or the re afterwards. To go right up to T and to go back would be much too difficult, musically speaking. So they contented simply with taking the name of the last degree from the initials of the two words in the last incise. We're now going to listen to track 2, which is obtainable on our website, lausinEcclesia.com.
Utque aut laxis resolare febris, mea gestorum famore glorum, solve por nocte labere aquam, sancte Ioannes.
So there you have the origins. It's good to have the kind of historical origins of what we're doing. So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Here on the bottom of the page, we give a kind of a ruler, a solfa ruler, because the intervals are not all the same. Here between do and re, there's one tone. Between re and mi, there's one tone. But between mi and fa, notice the spacing is different. It's closer. You have a half tone. Likewise, between ti and do, there's a half tone. Ti, do. But between fa and sol, and between sol, la, and between la and ti, there's one tone. So tone, tone, half tone, 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 half tone. Now, with that, we have to see how that pans out, how that works out with the different configurations possible when you have the do clef on the 4th line, when you have it on the 3rd line, when you have it on the 2nd line. You see, that's going to change where the do is, and likewise where all the other notes are. So that's what's spelled out for you on the next page. Do clef 4th line in the first diagram here. Do clef 4th line on the diagram, first diagram here. You have do on the 4th line, and then re above. And of course, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re. Okay, now you're going to tell me, I know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, but going backwards, what do I do? Well, here's what I would suggest. To begin, if you don't know the names of the notes backwards and forwards, then what you want it to do is you want to write them out. And for the first couple of lessons, you have them in front of you so that when you read backwards, or if you have to jump a note, you simply read from your little solfa ruler. And that's what we've done here. And we're going to put this ruler underneath to help with the reading. Over to in the middle, we have we've changed the place of the do clef. The do clef is now on the 3rd line. There's the do. And going down, do, ti, la, sol, fa. Fa is on the last line. But that gives you more space, more possibilities above the do. It's easier now. You don't need the ruler. Do, re, mi, fa. You can bring it down also to the 2nd line, not to the 1st line. You'd never see that. But you can bring it, the do clef down to the second line, which gives you a lot of space above do, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, all the way to la. And then going down from the do, ti, la, sol. Sol is the last position underneath the first line, the lowest line. With the fa clef, there are likewise three positions. And the positions here are given according to their frequency. The most frequent is on the third line. Okay, you're reading from fa, sol, la, ti. There's no problem there. Going backwards, fa, mi, re, do, ti, and ti on the first line. So fa, mi, re, do, and then you have to go back to ti over here. More rarely, much more rarely, do you find these last two. On the second line, gives you a lot more room above the fa, sol, la, ti, do on the top line, and then underneath fa, mi, re, do. On fa clef, on the first line, you don't have much room above the fa, but you have a lot of room below. So let's go down. Fa, mi, re, do. We're right here now. Ti, la, sol. So here, that's one of the things that you just have to get used to, like B-A, ba, in reading, and your times tables. If you want to learn Gregorian chant, you're going to have to know how to read it, and you have to become proficient at reading the notation with any position of the clef. Don't worry, you're not going to have to do that all by yourself. That's the purpose of this course, is to give you some exercises, and that's what we're all geared for today, to prepare you to do some exercises to actually read some Gregorian chant. So after looking at the sol fa, we want to look at the basic notes that used in Gregorian chant. The very basic note is the square punctum. You see here on the bottom of page 5. It's just a square note here, and of course you see that that's in the T position just under the do line on the third line. On the right you have some notation there for the stenographic notation, which is much earlier. This square punctum dates from about the 14th century. The stenographic notation is from 9th and 10th century. So that, as I was saying, the stenographic notation just tells you go up, go down, without telling you how much. Whereas we're going to see very clearly from our exercises that the 14th century notation tells us how much to go up and how much to go down. Exactly, sing do now, sing re now, sing do again. Besides that square punctum, you also have a rhombus. Now, this rhombus is less frequent. It's a little bit, it's a dependent note. You never find a rhombus all by itself. You always find it leaning on another note. For example, on a note like this. This is called a virga. Virga in Latin means just a stick. And that's more comprehensible when you look at the old stenographic sign. That looks like a stick, doesn't it? There's a little bit of a suggestion of the stick there with the stem that's added to the square punctum. So the virga is a square punctum plus that stem on it. What's the difference between a square punctum and a virga? Very largely and generally speaking, the virga will be used for a higher note and the punctum for a lower note. But that's not a precise rule that you want to be a stickler about. but that at least is the origin of the difference between the virga and the square punctum. In addition, you also have this kind of tooth note, which is called a quilisma. Quilisma comes from a Greek word which means to roll. And the musicologists have hypotheses that that might correspond to a kind of an ornament that comes from the East, from the Greeks. You know, if you've ever heard Greek or Syrian chant, there's a lot of that kind of thing. That might be the kind of nuance that is signified here. The thing is, it's difficult to, if you have a choir of 40 members, to get all of that in unison. So the method of Solesmes, which we're following here, has used another way of interpreting that. More on that later. There is also the Strophicus, which comes from the apostropha. That reminds you of the apostrophe. An apostrophe in English is a shortening, indicates a shortening. Cannot becomes can't. There's an O that's, and an N and an O that are omitted. In fact, all of the origins of these signs are Greek grammatical signs. The punctum, actually, the origin is a dot, which is our period. And likewise here for the apostrophe has come out into English as a grammatical sign too. The apostrophe is generally a light note, just like the apostrophe in English signifies a shortening. There's also an eriscus, and that is a more rare kind of note. More on that later. That's not a note that you'll be encountering right from the beginning. I want to show you here how you can understand why they chose this kind of 14th century notation. First of all, with a square punctum. You have to remember, envisage yourself or imagine yourself in the 14th century. They didn't have big pens then. They had pens that resembled as to the nib, this felt pen. That is a kind of a long nib that can be dragged across the paper and easily make a square like that. Now, to make a virga, all you had to do was draw the thin side down like that. You can see that the notation is really more conceivable from the kind of instruments that they used. Suppose we want, now the rhombus, very simple. All we do is we tilt the nib. The tooth note here, the quilisma, all we do is we shake it up and down. For the apostrophe, there you have to turn the pen right so that you end up with a thin stroke at the end. And then the eriscus, all you have to, it's kind of a little tooth note. It goes down, then up, then down. Very simple. So you see, when you're talking about notation, you're talking about someone taking down what's going on or copying out something. The notation is likely to be something that's adapted to what they had. Perhaps if nowadays we were given the task to invent a notation, it might come out quite different with Bic pens, or to tell the truth, yes, Bic pens are still available these days. It's not as if that the Bic pens have gone out of style or are unavailable on the market. But we might have come up with something else simply because our instruments were available, were different. So Now, each of these notes that we have here equal one beat. Now, we insist on using one pulse when talking in Gregorian chant because we want to avoid the violence that the word beat might indicate. A beat is a kind of a stroke of a hammer or a rod on the desk, something a real something that hits. Whereas the pulse gives it a more of a smooth kind of meaning, and that's the kind of thing that we want to bring across. We're going to be going over that backwards and forwards, sideways and sideways also from lesson 5 on. There's a way of doubling the length of a note, and that's simply by adding a dot after the note. Here you have a dotted square punctum and a dotted rhombus, a dotted virga. That equals 2 pulses by adding the dot. The dot adds 2 pulses. And note, that's different from what happens in modern music. In modern music, you take, say, a quarter note, and you add a dot, that's equal to a quarter note plus an eighth note. It adds half the value, whereas in Gregorian chant, you take one note, that's 1 pulse, add a dot, that makes 2 notes. That's 1 long note lasting 2 pulses. So I want you to be aware of that difference between modern notation and Gregorian chant notation. On to more details. We have to go through these details in order to be able to read. The B flat, we said that there's you do find 1 flat, 1 alteration in Gregorian chant, that is the B flat. That B flat is flattens the T under the Do. So Do T makes a half tone. Do Te makes a full tone. Of course, that modifies the interval between the Te and the Do. So let's just take a look at that. That has to be seen. Do and T. Between Do and T is a half tone. And then after that, going down, you have La. And between T and La is a full tone. Now, we take this interval here and we flatten this, 1 half tone, Te. Call that Te. What happens there is that between Do and Te is a full tone. And the half tone is between the La and Te. So that Do to La, whatever you pass through, is 1.5 tones. It's just the half tone is situated in a half tone from the Do in one case, and half tone from the La in the other case. Now the B flat, we have to have some notions about how long it holds for. The B flat holds, and this is explained on this page here, page 8. The B flat is annulled, canceled at a bar. So this is a bar here. The bars are the subject matter of next chapter. So if you allow me just to leave that till next time. The encounter of a natural sign, you see the natural sign here, it's the same in modern music. Now that actually requires an explanation too. I want you to know that T corresponds to B in modern music. Now, back earlier on, they used to call that B flat. That was a sagging B. They just made the first part sag a little, and that was B flat. And what they called B natural was B square. And that gave the natural sign here. So the B flat is canceled at the encounter of a bar, at the encounter of a natural sign, at the end of a word is the next one. So what's happening here, if the B flat carried out through the whole example, we wouldn't have to repeat the B flat. So here, after the first word tu, another word begins, solus. You have to repeat the B flat because there's a B flat here. And then sanctus, again, there's another B flat, so you have to repeat the B flat again. And then at the end of the line, automatic cancellation of the B flat, and you have to express the B flat on the next line, printed line. There are certain chants, very rare, in which the B flat is kind of in the key signature, but they're rare, and there tend to be more recent chants, like 13th century. This one is likely from the 13th century. The Kustos is simply a courtesy note. Here you see it's circled in red. It's a half note which occurs at the end of a line or at the end of a major part of a piece when there's some trouble adjusting to the next part. Here there's a change of the clefs. See, the clef here is on the fourth line, but because the next part of the piece goes up too high, you have to bring down the do clef down to the third line so as to be able to get the notation in within the range of the staff. So here, what this is telling you, just as a courtesy note, the next note is what you would read here. This is actually a do, ti, la, sol, fa. This is a fa. The fa is actually here now. Some other minor signs that we have to know anyway. An asterisk marks off the intonation of a chant. So here, suppose this chant were intoned, the cantor would give solo, Kyrie, and then the rest of the choir would come in, eleison. That's all it means, that the intonation stops there and everybody comes in afterwards. IIJ means just that you repeat it once, which is a second time, and then a third time, IJ, 3 times. IJ means you repeat it once, that is a total of 2 times. The asterisk also comes sometimes at the end of a piece after either the soloist or one side has finished what they're doing and everybody comes together. So here the asterisk shows that after that asterisk the whole choir comes in and sings Dominus to finish the piece. Final instance in which the asterisk is used, you see the asterisk marking the mediant of psalmody. This is a exultate Deo adiutori nostro. There's a little pause there. Jubilate Deo Jacob. See, that simply divides, if you like, the psalm verse in half, and sometimes it might indicate that, for example, the cantor sings the first part and the choir comes in on the second part. Last instance of the use of the asterisk, sometimes at the end of some Kyries, I can't remember any other instances, Kyrie can be ninefold or sixfold, say 6 or 9 times repeated. On the very last Kyrie, you can have it so that, you see, the Kyries are alternated, one choir against the other choir. Now what you can do on the very last one is you get the choir that's singing the last Kyrie, sings the first part. Then the other choir sings the second part. And then finally, they all come together for the last part. And that's what's indicated by first a single asterisk, then a double asterisk, and then after, so that's what's happening, huh? The choir that's singing sings the first part, second choir, the second part, and then both the last part. Well, with that, we're ready to do a few exercises and read Gregorian chant. Now, the exercises, I have to say something about these. They're a very important part of the course of Laus in Ecclesia. You see, it's fine talking about notation, but it'd be just like an elementary school teacher showing you the alphabet. That's not interesting in itself. What the children want is to be able to read with the alphabet. And likewise, this notation has got to become a habit. It's got to be like reading, unconscious, simple, the deciphering of what you have before you. And that's what we're after in the exercises that accompany each of the lessons of this course. There are 15 lessons, so there's an exercise with several exercises with each lesson. Here we start very simply. You have a do clef on the 4th line, and very simple exercises. Let's see, where are we now? Where's that first note? Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, and do. So this is, the first note is do. So do, re, mi, you go back to do, re, do, mi, do, re. We've provided audio samples to help you on these first exercises. The way you should approach this is that you ought to use the audio exercises, unless you're completely familiar with this and there's no problem. But sing along with the audio exercises, but I would advise you to be very careful not simply to follow passively. If you follow passively, you're not getting the habit of really reading. You want to be proactive with your exercise. Be present to what you're doing. There are several exercises here, and we're going to listen now to the first exercise that we give, which is on track 3 of the audio samples that are available on the Laus in Ecclesia website. So here we listen.
Do, re, mi, do, re, do, mi, do, re, mi, sol, la, fa, sol, fa, la, fa, sol, sol, la, ti, sol, la, sol, ti, sol, la, ti, do, la, ti, la, do, la, ti, ti, do, re, ti, do, ti, re, ti, do.
The first time through, you simply sing on recto tono, that is, on a note, the names of the notes. That makes it easier. The second time through, as you'll hear with track 4, the next track, they sing the names of and they sing the notes with the names of the notes. Do, re, mi, do, re, do, mi, do, re, etc. And so you have an example there. All you have to do is follow. Again, maybe the first time you'll be just following like a little sheep, but you want to become more and more concerned with almost anticipating what the model is giving you, so that you're in fact doing the work. You're not letting them do the work and just not learning. It's by really having to decipher that you learn to read. There are several other exercises with the do clef on the third line, do clef on the second line, fa clef on the fourth line, on the third line, sorry, and do clef on the fourth line. But this is kind of an additional exercise. You'll doubtless recognize the tune that they give there. Another part of each chapter is the written assignment. And the written assignment is going to have to be completed by those who do the degree. That is, they want the qualification of the first level of Lausanne Ecclesia. The homework assignment requires a certain amount of work, a certain amount of time investment. But again, it helps to cement the instruction of the lesson. Now, this assignment involves taking a chant. Here you are taking the Victimae Paschali Laudes, the sequence of Easter. And there what you have to do is, first of all, make 2 columns. And in the left column, you put the Latin syllables, and corresponding to the Latin syllables, you name the notes. So here we have the first part of the exercise done. Here we have in the gradual, I took the gradual here and opened it to Easter and found the sequence here on page 242. This is the old gradual of 1908. In the back, remember, you have an appendix. Appendix 1, index of pieces. And it goes through all the pieces that you have that are referred to in the course, and it tells you for each book, choir book, on what page you can find it. So here on this in this appendix for the sequence, it gives you for the new gradual, the old gradual, for the Liber Usualis, and the Missal, the Gregorian Missal. So there we go. The first incise has been done for you in the written assignment. What I propose to do is go and do a next incise. So they've done Victimae Paschali Laudes. We're going to do Immolent Christiani. So we go to the board and we make 2 columns. First column are the Latin syllables. Immolent Christi ani. There we go. The exercise consists in naming the notes that correspond to each syllable, because you'll notice that there's only 1 note per syllable in this piece. So, what's the first note? Well, do clef on 4th line. Do, ti, la. La. Second note is the note below, sol. Next note, it skips 1 note. Well, let's calculate. Do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi. Mi. And sol, fa, mi, re. See? Very simple. But we have to, we started off the same way when we learned how to read. So that is the extent of the first assignment. You simply have to do the whole of the sequence. There is one more section to this first chapter, this first lesson. It's called the excursus. This one is a general introduction to what the liturgy is about. It begins with the listening to an offertory, which kind of sets the scene for what the liturgy is about. There we have a translation on the bottom of page 15. An angel stood beside the altar of the temple with a golden censer in his hand, and a great deal of incense was given to him, and the perfume of the incense went up even to the presence of God. Alleluia. Now we're going to listen to that. that is given as a kind of mood setter for the excursus. The excursus itself means to give a definition of the liturgy. That is, it gives two definitions: an upward definition, that is, the response of the Christian people toward God, and a downward definition, God's gift to the Christian people. So if you like, it's reciprocal. The excursus is a couple of pages long, but it's well worth reading through it, and the format is made so that it's not too difficult. So I would urge you not to skip over these. These give a helpful background to what you've learned, because as we want to impress in the course of these lessons, Gregorian chant is not really something that you just learn about in the classroom. It's something you do. And Gregorian chant is like the technique beyond which opens up into prayer. Thank you very much.
Sing